Hello and welcome. I am your host for the evening, Goblin Kwain, and tonight I'm going to continue a series of mine that I call roadside sightings or on the road. Basically, all the stories take place when the person is driving or in the car on the road, as it were. This is my third or fourth video. I may just have started a playlist for them on YouTube by now. So this time, all the stories come from the Fairy Census. If you are a regular here to my channel, you probably know what that is because I talk about it all the time. But if you don't, I'll just do a quick little ramble about what it is. The Fairy Census is ongoing academic research done by Dr. Simon Young, and by collecting anonymous submissions from people about their real first-hand or sometimes second-hand encounters with fairies and the like, he's collecting data on the modern attitudes towards fairies. And it's very interesting because you do get this wide variety of experiences in the Fairy Census. For example, what they look like. Whatever people see in their experience, individual experience, look like. It's an amazing, amazing piece of research. From an academic standpoint, I imagine, and also just for, honestly, entertainment value as well. It's just very interesting. So, that's what we're going to be reading from tonight. And despite these stories all taking place while driving and with them all sharing the same general theme, there is actually quite a bit of variety here in the things seen or experienced, but also the feelings associated with these encounters. Some are whimsical and endearing, even kind of cute, and some are quite spooky, and others are just strange. Those are kind of my favorites, the weirdest ones. I love them all, though. So, sure, the theme is a bit repetitive, but repetition is also kind of key to these experiences because, as Simon Young and probably others have theorized, there could very well be something to the nature of driving, no matter what time of day or how long, that puts one in a meditative state and therefore primes you, perhaps, for a strange experience. You don't have to drive for hours through the night to be lulled into that semi-hypnotic state where your brain goes all fuzzy. It can just be a 15-minute drive home from work in broad daylight. It's happened to me many of times. You go into autopilot and your mind begins to wander, and suddenly you're home with no recollection of how you got there. So, sometimes when people are in this autopilot, meditative states of driving, that trance-like flow is interrupted by a very jarring and unexpected sighting. Such is the case in our stories tonight. Or maybe it's the twixt and tween nature of roads, that they are borderlines from one place to the next. Maybe that makes them supernaturally active. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Who knows? But I really do love these stories. I mean, there's a reason that this is my third or fourth installment in this series. I think there's just a certain atmosphere that goes along with being on the road. And not all of these take place at night, but there's just something soothing and comforting and definitely inviting about that visual of an open road, especially at night. No one else is around. Maybe you've got some cozy music or your favorite paranormal podcast or radio show on, and you've got the heat or the air conditioning just how you want it, or maybe it's a beautiful night and you can have the windows open and this lush, cool air is cascading in and gently caressing your face. I'm really trying to sell it here. Anyway, if you're watching the video on YouTube, I will have different stock video of nighttime roads rolling as the episode is playing out. But if you're just listening, maybe just put yourself in that place, in that state of mind. Just role play that you're in the passenger seat or the back seat, and I'm at the wheel. Don't worry, Goblin's at the wheel. I'm a very good driver. So you can just relax and listen to these stories and just kind of ponder what exactly was seen. If that sounds good to you, let's get started. Our first story took place in the US, in Virginia. It was about 10 or 11 a.m., the 17th of March, 2011, bright, sunny day with patches of snow on the grass. This was close to the Virginia border, to the best of my recollection, before entering West Virginia. The route we were on goes through mountainous areas in West Virginia and Western Virginia. The freeways are all down in little valleys. The land slopes up to ridges planted with trees, pine trees, and other species. My husband was driving. We'd been on the road for about 2 to 3 hours, and I was idly glancing out the window. On the ridges, I saw 2 tree creatures. One was female with just a stump for the head and standing very still, pretending to be a tree. Another had a triangular base, something like a Dalek from Doctor Who, also standing very still. I got quite a jolt when I saw them, thinking, what the hell are those? It didn't make any sense. There are plenty of dead trees along the route. Normally, I didn't give them a thought, but there was something sentient about these 2 trees. It felt like they had been caught in the open and froze in position so they wouldn't be detected. One of them had eyes, but I don't remember which one. We'd driven this route multiple times. I had never seen anything like this before, nor did I see anything in subsequent trips, although I looked. I was not asleep, nor was I sleepy. I can't sleep in the car, especially in the mountains. Not drunk or hungover, I don't drink. Not on any drugs. I was in a good but subdued mood. I had a lovely visit with my daughter, but sad to be leaving and a bit worried about her as she was going to Peru with her boyfriend and his family. Seeing what appeared to be elementals didn't ease my mind. I told my late friend about the sighting at the time. My husband doesn't remember me mentioning seeing these. I don't think he saw them since he was concentrating on driving. Or I may have kept my mouth shut, because although ghosts are one thing, sentient trees are, well, barking mad. And in broad daylight, too. All right. Very cool. Always love stories with tree creatures. There's a few of them in the Fairy Census. It sounds like they somewhat resemble trees, but I guess with enough of a difference for them to stand out as not being trees. The witness said that it looked like they were pretending to be trees and looked like they had been caught or something. I do wish there was a little bit better of a description, more thorough of a description of these tree creatures, because I'm not totally sure what they looked like besides like a tree. But she said one of them had eyes, and I just wonder what the eyes looked like. And that the female had a stump for a head. So was it just the stump of a tree on the ground and she picked out some kind of face in it? Or was there some sort of body underneath the stump head? Not the most thorough description, but very strange and compelling nonetheless. So, broad daylight in this mountainous region, and she does sound like she was in that hypnotic trance-like state, just looking out the window and kind of zoning out. Anyway, yeah, I don't really have too much to say about that one, other than I love a good tree creature. So, with that, I think I'm just going to move on to the next one. And this one took place in Ireland, sometime between the year 2010 and 2019, when the witness was in their 50s, and the time was between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. We were coming home along an empty country road in daylight, in springtime, my husband driving. I was in the passenger seat. We were crossing the bridge over the River Barrow, and came around a gentle bend in the road. Our turnoff was to the right and was in the distance. About 5 yards away, on my side of the road, a woman was walking. She was about 4 to 5 feet tall and had short, dark hair with her back to me. She wore a fitted black jacket and full black skirt with a red design around the hem. I saw her very clearly as it was daylight, but she didn't stop or turn around as we approached. She didn't wave or put up her hand, which is the usual practice in the Irish countryside. We passed her, but I didn't look back at her. She was so real that I asked my husband why he didn't indicate and pull out to give her more room. He didn't see her at all. I was so sure I had seen her that we turned the car around and returned to the place and stopped. We got out. No sign of her. No houses where she could have gone. Nothing. There have been other experiences here, but this was the most recent and the most clearest. While this specific area isn't necessarily known for fairies, the wider area is and has fairy paths and a fairy tree. I don't know for sure that it was a fairy experience. It may have been a spirit or ghost, as you call them. Fairies, I believe, are spirits of nature, creatures who are part of the land and associated with special, powerful places. I've only had these sightings since I have lived in rural Ireland, except when I was a child, when I spent my summers in the countryside on the Isle of Man. My grandmother was a native Manx speaker who believed in the little people, as did my mother. All right, so at the end there, she says we have a rich history of a Celtic fairy belief. And yeah, Ireland and the Isle of Man are just thick with fairy lore. So as I said, whether this was a fairy encounter or not, who knows? But it also does kind of possibly fall into that category of experiences that I'm very interested in that Tim Renner from Strange Familiars calls unpeople. And Joe Hickey Hall on the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast has covered some of these stories as well, or talked to people who've had these kinds of experiences, where you meet someone or you see someone, and for all intents and purposes, they seem like a living human person, a normal human person, but they're not normal because something about them just seems off, or I don't know, like this person, they disappeared. But they didn't seem to be anything other than just a person. Very interesting. So the Fairy Census does have a question, has many questions, but one of them is that if the area where the experience took place is known for fairies at all. And the witness said that the specific area wasn't, but the wider area was. There's no specifics about which each area in respect is, because Simon does keep more specific locations hidden, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Anonymous. I don't know if in an area can be anonymous, but he keeps the areas out, the specific areas, because he doesn't want people going and looking for these places or anything, especially if, they're private property and stuff. But the witness says that the wider area, whatever that may be, maybe it's a county in Ireland, city in Ireland, who knows, has fairy paths and a fairy tree. So yeah, fairy paths would be areas that are said to be known for being old routes that fairies would use, often between sacred or significant sites, like old burial mounds or hill forts or things like that. And then fairy trees are just specific kinds of trees that are associated with fairies. Any kind of thorn tree usually is a fairy tree, a hawthorn tree. People who, of traditional Irish fairy faith belief, would leave those trees alone. You would never cut one down or disturb them, because you're sure to incite the wrath of the fairies, which you don't want to do. And then also, I did want to mention about this story. I made note that they had just crossed a bridge over a river in their car. So roadways, of course, are a twixt and tween place, but bridges definitely are as well. That's a border place between two sides of the river. So we got a lot of factors going on here that might prime you for seeing a fairy or a spirit or an unperson. Who knows? I really like that story. It was kind of spooky. Something about it. The woman, all in black, just walking down the lonely country road. And this one also took place in broad daylight, so it can happen any time of day. It doesn't have to be at night. Actually, our next one took place during the day as well, right between noon and 3 p.m., and this was in Shropshire, England, in the 1990s, when the witness was in their 20s. It's a very short one. My wife was driving down a country road in Shropshire and saw a very short old man, about 3 feet high, pushing a little cart or wheelbarrow along the grassy verge by the side of the road. There were no houses or driveways nearby, and no other cars on the road. It was the middle of the day in summertime. He was dressed in a light or mid-green 2 or 3-piece suit and wore a green hat. She was so surprised as she drove past, at about 50 miles per hour, that she looked in the rearview mirror, but the man had gone, without any apparent place for him to have hidden. Very short one, but I love it. I love that he was pushing this little cart or wheelbarrow. I don't know, there's something very cute, and he's wearing a little green suit and a green hat. Sometimes the fairies are cited as wearing green, but also it was a thing that humans were advised to not wear green because it was the fairies' color. And again, fairies are very easily offended. Turns out, at least in folklore, if you wore green, you would offend them because it's their color. They gatekeep the color green, apparently. So it was advised not to wear the color green. Anyway, really short one, but great little image there of him pushing the little carts, just going about his business. Who knows what he's hauling there? Maybe some vegetables or something. All right, so the next one is another little man, but a bit of a creepier one, and this was a nighttime experience. This one took place in the northeast of England in the 1980s, when the witness was in their 20s. I was in a friend's car, driving back to Nottingham from Darlington, where we had been to see a band. We didn't have a map and got lost. We became so confused that at one point we found ourselves at the coast. It was around 3 in the morning, and my friend pulled into a lay-by on a lonely road to nap. He told me to wake him in 15 minutes. While he slept, I sat quietly, watching the clock, but I had a strong feeling that we were being watched. I thought I would turn around, see nothing, and be reassured. I turned and saw a figure about 3 feet high walking towards the car, peering in. He looked a little like a leprechaun. He had a lined face and beard, but he wore a black hooded cloak over a dark-colored jacket and trousers. I remember he wore a wide black belt, and he had a sack over his shoulder, which dragged along the ground. I saw him clearly. I can't remember if there was a street light in the lay-by, or if the car lights were still on, or if there was moonlight. I was so shocked, I turned back and woke my friend. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen, because I thought I had imagined it. But when he woke, as he turned to put on his seatbelt, he looked shocked and said, "What's that?" Then he started the car and shot off down the road. I was so frightened that I just stared down at my hands in my lap. Maybe 100 yards down the road, my friend braked suddenly and cried out. I asked him what he had seen, and he described the same hooded figure, and he had braked because he thought he had saw another one in the road. He told me he had seen these creatures before near his home in Notts, and they were always by the road and dragging sacks. Oh man, I love that story. I really love that story. I don't know, something about, I don't know, well, I love little cloaked goblin creature beings. But the sack over his shoulder dragging on the ground, that is something really creepy about that. It's like, what is in his sack? But also it's so specific. And the fact that her friend said he'd seen them before and they were always by the road and dragging sacks, that is wild. So I do wonder, I don't know if that's, part of that local folklore, or if other people have seen them, or is this something specific to this person? Now, I did ask around, people who know a lot about British folklore, like my friend Claire Casely and Simon Young, and they assured me they haven't heard of anything, unfortunately, about little sack-dragging cloaked goblins, but fascinating. I do love the nighttime goblin-y road stories, so that's kind of one of my favorites, I think. The next story is a little different. It took place in Texas. I was 17, and I was driving home from a friend's house along a road I had traveled dozens of times before. I was listening to the radio on a station that played what was then referred to as college radio. It played alternative music. This was in the 1990s, just a few months before grunge music hit and changed the music scene. The music this station played at the time was truly different. Bands like Perry Ubu and Art of Noise. My point is that to hear what most people would consider strange music on this radio station was not unusual. As I was driving, I began hearing music that was truly unusual and different. It had no lyrics, just instrumentation. The last thing I can recall is thinking that I had never heard this song before, and never have since, despite hundreds, if not thousands of hours listening to that same station in the years afterward. The next thing that I knew, I was driving down a road I had never driven down before. The colors of the hayfields on either side of the road that I was driving looked unusual, like I was peering through a piece of prism or something iridescent. I had a sense that some time had passed, and the strange music I had heard was no longer playing. As I continued to drive, wondering what the hell had just occurred, I drove into a neighboring town and realized I had somehow ended up 15 miles in the opposite direction from which I had traveled. Once I had my bearings, I was then able to drive home successfully. As I said earlier, I had traveled my intended route dozens upon dozens of times. I have never doubted what happened was the result of something extraordinary, and not just a case of absent-mindedness or road hypnosis. Alright, so yeah, that one's kind of unique. I really like that one. Now, this is one of those stories where you may read it or hear it and think, why is this in the Fairy Census? Where do fairies play into that? And I don't believe the author even mentioned that. I think it was just emailed in, if I recall correctly. I will double check that. So it's very interesting. And I don't bring that up to say that it shouldn't be in the Fairy Census. I think if you think it should be in the Fairy Census, then it should be. And like I was saying at the beginning, just the variety of experiences that people submit to the Fairy Census is just fascinating. So, yeah, he's listening to this college radio station, which, yeah, I mean, I have a sense of what he's describing a college radio station. I don't know if they're still a thing, but stations that would play music that's more independent or not the chart-topping mainstream music, alternative music, as he said, underground music perhaps, obscure, if you want to use that word, but yeah, so it wasn't unusual to hear quote-unquote unusual music, but some truly unusual music came on. And after it was gone, he found himself totally lost and then in a different town, a neighboring town. And yeah, they fully believed that there was something, I don't know, otherworldly going on. Very interesting. I love that. The radio. Something about that. I don't know. Yeah, the liminal radio broadcast. Very cool. I don't really know what to make of it, but that's a great story. I love it. So the next story took place in Louisiana between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. I was about 8 years old, and I was sitting in the back seat of the car while looking out the window. My father was a doctor, and whenever there was an automobile accident, he always stopped to render aid. This was in the 1940s. There were only 2-lane highways, so collisions were fairly common. The car might have been stopped for that reason at the time, or we were driving very slowly, but I looked out my window, and on the shoulder of the highway in the opposite lane was a tiny horse-drawn wagon with a tiny driver. The horse was brown and about 8 inches from nose to tail as I looked down on it, and the driver was in proportion. The wagon was kind of a dingy red farm-type wagon. The wagon and horse were about the size that could fit in an apple carton. The wagon, horse, and man all looked like real living beings in perfect proportion. They seemed unaware of me or anything but what they were doing. At the time, I did not think the sighting was miraculous or even odd, and I didn't say anything to my parents. But all I remember is that I wanted to take the tiny beings home to play with. I was wide awake at the time. Although I remember it vividly, I gave it little thought for years. But in later life, I started reading about elementals and fairy beings and realized I'd had an actual sighting. I have had no sightings since. This experience was on a highway in Louisiana, and no one talked about fairies. I don't remember even having heard about fairies at the time, and I knew nothing about ghosts or aliens, and little about angels. I never read fiction or non-fiction stories about fairy beings until many years later, when I was around 30 years old, and I started reading about elementals and other fairy beings in a book entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. Since then, I have researched more. I now believe that fairies exist and are basically soul-like beings that vibrate at a range of frequencies that humans can't see unless certain circumstances allow it. That's a pretty special one, I think. I mean, tiny horse and carriage. It's so strange. It's similar to the one from earlier where the man was pushing the little carts and that it was a being kind of caught in some kind of just maybe even mundane domestic kind of task. But this was completely miniature. Wild. Absolutely wild. So they say at the end that they believe that fairies exist, of course. They saw what they believe was a fairy. Interesting, too, that the fairy or the being, whatever, really paid her no mind. Did they not see her? So she says that she now believes that fairies exist and are beings, soul-like beings, which I'm not sure what that means, that vibrate at a range of frequencies that humans can't see unless certain circumstances allow it. I've heard people explain things this way, that things are at different vibrational levels, and I'm not even going to pretend like I really understand that. I feel like I know what they mean, but I'm not sure. Is that like a physics thing, that everything vibrates at a different frequency? But I don't know anything about physics. I'm actually really horrible at science and math. But maybe I can have an understanding of it one day. But anyway, so if fairies and things like that exist on a different frequency or something and are usually not perceptible to the naked human eye, is that also the case vice versa? Are humans not always perceptible to fairies and things on different frequency levels? And so maybe that's why the little man in the cart didn't pay her any mind, because he couldn't see her. I don't know. Interesting. So she says that these kind of things can't be seen by humans unless certain circumstances allow it. So I wonder what those certain circumstances were in this instance. Was it that she was a child? Because children seem to be more perceptive to supernatural phenomena, if you will. Was it that she was on the road, which is a twixt and tween place? Who knows? Also notable that it was her only sighting ever. It was a one-off experience. I did read a story in a previous episode that was from the Fairy Census of, I think it was also a person in the car, and they saw, but they didn't see with their eyes, a procession going by and like a tiny or a very small horse or something like that. But, so this was kind of a unique in that she said she saw it with her naked eye. And I don't know, just this miniature man and horse and wagon. Pretty awesome. I really like that story. Oh, I forgot one line. Wow. I formatted it weird, so I missed the closing line from the story, which was, "The memory of my fairy sighting is still vivid after over 70 years. That's incredible. To me, that just, you can say what you want, that, I don't know, that she didn't have the experience, but to last in your mind for so long, vivid, I believe she said that she can remember them vivid. Yeah, I remember it vividly and gave it little thought for years, which makes sense. If you're a child, you often just kind of take those kind of things as they are. Awesome story. The next one took place in Illinois when the witness was in their 30s, and this happened between midnight and 3 a.m. I was on my way to pick up my ex-fiancé from work. The town this story takes place in is strange. 1 minute, you're in civilization. Next, it's country roads. Then, back in the town again. As I was passing the hospital, I stopped at a stop sign, and that was when I first actually realized how foggy it had become. I believe it was early October because I noted how perfectly creepy it seemed given the time of year. The fog was so thick I could barely see even with my headlights on, so I was driving pretty slowly. Suddenly, at the base of this fog, I saw 2 back legs of a fawn. They were the same size, small, that same light brown with white spots, but I only saw 2 legs, and the lower half of what I swear was an upright body, complete with a small deer tail. I saw it clearly in my headlights as it ran right across my path. It ran like a human, 1 foot before the other, and I heard its tiny hooves hit the road as it ran. I think I actually sat there in shock for a few minutes because I lost time somehow and was really late picking up my ex. He was not impressed by my story, but I know what I saw. Before this moment in my life, I had a very different idea of fairies in mind. I thought things like what I saw were just artistic depictions. My point here being, I had no preconceived notion I might ever encounter such a creature. I wish I'd seen its upper body, but I think the fog was there to hide this being. It felt intentional. I'm currently trying to figure out what a fairy is, but for now, I think fairy is an umbrella term for a lot of different beings around the world that seem to be not entirely here. I believe some of the old ideas that fairy is in the same realm as the dead. I think they are non-corporeal entities that have a very close connection to our planet and protect it, which is why I think most do not like humans. But honestly, I think much of it is a mystery. Many theories, but really no known way to prove any of them. Little different there. Don't you just love the variety? Gosh, I just love the Fairy Census so much. So I think this is my first fawn or satyr or whatever story that I've read. I have read a centaur story before, not from the Fairy Census. I think it was from Linda Godfrey's website and Liminal Earth. I think it was a Liminal Earth episode. Anyway, first satyr sighting, I believe, the whole story was really interesting. I mean, like I said, the actual specific locations in the Fairy Census are kept anonymous or private. That's the word. The locations are kept private. So they mentioned that this town that this took place in is very strange. And I do wish I knew what made it so strange, but I'll just have to speculate. And then this fog descends, this October fog, very atmospheric. And this is in the middle of the night. Remember this, they said this took place between midnight and 3 a.m. So this fog descends in this weird town in the middle of the night while you're driving. It doesn't really get more picturesque than that. So at the bottom of the fog, I guess the fog was kind of hanging in the air a bit. They saw 2 little deer legs and then the lower torso, I suppose, of a human body with a little deer tail. I mean, it sounds pretty adorable. It reminds me of the little fawns in Fantasia or something. And they heard its little feet, its little cloven hooves, clip-clop across the road. Wow. And then they did mention that they said, I think I actually sat there in shock for a few minutes because I lost time somehow and was really late picking up my ex. I mean, mentioning lost time was interesting to me because that's hallmark in so many, not just fairy experiences, but UFO experiences, different anomalous experiences. And I like that she said that the fog felt intentional. So yeah, maybe this being was trying to cloak itself, although couldn't hide its little feet and its little body. One of the questions on the survey for the Fairy Census is, what is a fairy? And it includes a text box, so you can type out your answer. So that's why usually at the end of these encounters, it's always brought up that the way I edit it together, it's all one block of text, but then you can tell it's formatted where it's their experience, and then there's different answers to questions, and I just kind of edit it all together, usually. So that's why at the end, it's generally people answering the question about what they think a fairy is. So they said that, they're trying to figure it out, which I can relate to. They think it's an umbrella term for a lot of different beings around the world that seem to be not entirely quote unquote here, just kind of like that last story. It's like they exist on some kind of different plane of reality, frequency, I don't know. I thought it was very interesting that they said that they believe fairy is in the same realm as the dead. That is it's probably exists in other cultures as well, but that was definitely a Celtic belief, an Irish belief, that the fairy world and the underworld or the land of the dead were one and the same. So very interesting that they think that as well. And of course, as they say, it's really all speculation. I think they said it's much of it is a mystery. There are many theories, but really no known way to prove any of them. And yeah, I agree. And there's a part of me that really likes that part of it. I love the mystery. I need there to be unexplained things in the world. So I'm fine with the mystery. As much as I speculate and categorize and this and that, I really do like the mystery. I mean, it gives me room to do that. I don't know, maybe you think you have it all figured out and what exactly fairies are, but I don't. And I'm totally fine with that, honestly. Might be my preference. If I ever find out, we'll see how I feel. The next one took place in England, specifically in Devon, in the 1990s when the witness was under the age of 10 and the time was between noon and 3 p.m. I was a child. I think I was 10. In the back seat of the car on a family holiday. We were in Devon, and we were driving down a country road in the daytime. My father, driving the car, pulled over on the narrow country lane to let someone pass, and as we stopped for a few seconds, I looked out the window and saw what looked like a tiny woman in a dress floating near the roadside hedge. I kept telling myself that it was a flower, and it did look a lot like a fuchsia. But as I stared for several seconds, it became the face of a small woman in a tiny red dress, hovering. Then the car moved, and I kept quiet, and I didn't even mention it to my parents who were in the car. I've never seen anything like it before or since. I'm a very rational and skeptical person, and I was even as a child. So I have tried to tell myself it was a flower or an insect many times. But the fact remains that it clearly was not either of those things. It was a tiny woman in a dress, which was almost flower-shaped. She was about the size of an adult's little finger. I don't remember seeing wings specifically, but the woman was hovering. I have no way to explain it, and I even feel a bit silly writing it down, as I have never told anyone. I really don't know what fairies are. I suppose because the creature looked like a tiny woman in a red dress hovering. To my knowledge, that is quite a normal description of a fairy, and I don't know of any other name that people would call that. That's an interesting question that she brings up about she doesn't really know what fairies are. To her knowledge, this is, what a fairy is generally described as looking like, which it can be, and what would be the alternative to what it would be. And I don't really know, even though I don't think that there's just that description of a fairy being a little woman in a dress. Even that's probably actually, maybe a more modern description, although she said she didn't see wings, and wings are wings are a modern detail to fairies. Really came about in the Victorian era with illustrations, but what else would you call a tiny floating woman? Kind of an interesting question. So I was not familiar with this type of flower that she mentions, a fuchsia. I only knew of the color. So I looked up the flower, and not only is it a very pretty flower, it really does look like a little woman in a dress in like a fluffy ball gown or something. Very interesting. Now, I'm not saying that she did indeed just see a fuchsia flower, but it's very interesting, little kind of anthropomorphic flower. It's very pretty. And I've mentioned several times already, about how one of the things I love about the Fairy Census is the variety of experiences. But another thing that I really love is that it gives people opportunity to tell these stories for the first time. She says she's never told anyone this, and it sounds like she probably wouldn't because she feels silly writing it down, even though she knows it'll be anonymous. So I really, really do love that function of the Fairy Census, because lots of people say that. They said, I've never told anyone this. I can't in some cases because of my job, whatever it may be. So very grateful for people who open up like that, even though it's anonymous. That's totally fine. It serves its purpose. It's kind of a more little magical one. The next one is going to be the last one for the night. This one also took place in England, but in Yorkshire, sometime between the year 2010 and 2019. The witness was in their 20s, and the time was between midnight and 3 a.m. I was driving home from a business trip. I live in a very rural part of North Yorkshire. I was driving over moorland when my car stalled and stopped. Everything cut out. In the distance, I could see what looked like lanterns approaching me. They got closer and closer, and suddenly it became as light as day. A fairy procession came into view with a king and queen on black horses. Their manes swept the ground. Behind them came a long line of fairies, some playing instruments. Their appearances varied. Those at the front of the line were quite beautiful, but those at the back were more soberly dressed, and their features were not so well defined. The music was old-fashioned and hypnotic. Pipes and flutes were prominent. Once they had passed me, my ignition cut in, and my car came back to life. What I experienced was real. They were not the figments of my imagination. They paid no attention to me whatsoever. I know that they were very real because my car died on me. I was a little afraid as they came closer, and locked my car doors. They passed in their own time, and only after they had passed did my car start up again. I was shaking, and so I drove very slowly on home. I live in the Yorkshire Dales, designated a place of outstanding beauty, rolling hills and moors. It could easily be associated with fairies, but I've never heard of any recent or confirmed sightings. I have seen many spirits. In fact, I was part of a church deliverance team, but I had never experienced fairies before. I honestly don't know what fairies are, but I do know what I saw. Love that one, love that one. I love a fairy procession, I can't lie. The old trooping gentry. Wow, and this one, it can be said ad nauseum. I know it comes up all the time, but this one really, I mean, you can see similarities to a lot of UFO or what might be extraterrestrial experiences people have. Especially ones on the road, have while driving. Their car stops, stalls, power totally cuts out, and then they see these lights approaching. It's so similar. And then as soon as whatever has passed by, the car springs to life again. So interesting. So spooky. I mean, as magical as it sounds, I don't blame them for locking their doors and being scared. I mean, what the hell are you supposed to think when this spectral whatever procession of fairies comes towards you in the middle of the night on a country lane? And the descriptions were awesome. I love it. The fairy queen and the king were riding at the front of the procession. Their horses, their black horses, their manes swept the ground. I mean, it sounds so magical and fantastical. And of course, the instruments and this hypnotic piping. Very interesting how, as it got further along in the procession, the fairies seemed more ill-defined, and I wonder why that was. Maybe it's the dead. If there is that parallel between fairies and the dead, maybe the dead bring up the back. And again, they say they paid me no attention whatsoever, just like the little man in the wagon. So why is that? Is that because they can't see the humans and the car and this world? Or is it because they have no reason to pay some lowly human in their car attention? They have their procession to do. So I love that. It's so magical. And I love their insistence that I know what I saw. Very interesting, too, that they said they were part of a church deliverance team. I'm not really sure what that is. It kind of sounds like exorcism or something. I don't know what that is. And I also haven't looked into it. Maybe I will. All right, well, we've reached our destination. Our car ride has come to an end. You fell asleep on the way and you were muttering all these really strange things about tiny carriages and sack-dragging goblins and tree people. Just kidding. I hope you enjoyed all those stories from the Fairy Census. This topic, this theme, the roadside or the driving experiences just never cease to interest me. And the Fairy Census never ceases to interest me. Speaking of the Fairy Census, it is, of course, as mentioned, the research project of Dr. Simon Young, and actually his podcast, Boggart and Banshee, just at this point released an episode about road ghosts and different kind of haunted roads and things like that. And this happens all the time where I get this synchronicity with the podcasts that I listen to, where I'll be working on something, and as I'm working on an episode, they will put out something that's a very similar theme or has themes of something that I'm working on. And it's not like it's a copying thing because it hasn't. They're like concurrent, so it feels very synchronous. So it's a great episode of Boggart and Banshee if you want more road-themed material. It's more on the ghostly side, but it's very good. As I mentioned, I have more videos on this roadside sightings. There's 2 others at this point, and I don't think I'll make a playlist. I don't need to get a million playlists going, but If you just, if you go on my YouTube channel and search roadside sightings, something with road, you'll find them. So, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back very soon with more strange stories and topics. Thanks for letting me drive you around and tell you stories all night. So until next time, take care and good night.